Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's stories begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And a little note before we begin. You may notice a few brief ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, the rest of the video is completely ad-free. Just you, the silence, and the stories. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the night carry you. If you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. It's one of those moments that doesn't feel like much when you first think about it, especially when you compare it to more extreme stories people tell. There's no clear danger, no direct confrontation, nothing that you can point to and say for certain that something was wrong. But sometimes it's not about what you saw, it's about how it felt in the moment, and how that feeling doesn't quite leave you even after everything is over. This happened a while ago during a time when my routine was very different from what most people would consider normal. I used to work early morning shifts, the kind that start before most people even think about waking up. My day would begin around 2 a.m., and part of that routine involved driving over an hour to get to Sydney. It was a long drive, quiet for the most part, especially at that time of night when the roads are nearly empty. And there's something about being on the road that early that feels different from driving during the day. Everything is darker, more still. The usual noise of traffic is gone, replaced by a kind of silence that makes even small sounds stand out more. You become more aware of your surroundings, even if there's not much to see. On most days, the drive was uneventful. Just a straight stretch of road, the same turns, the same landmarks passing by in the dark. It became routine after a while, something I didn't have to think about anymore. But there were certain conditions that changed the way the drive felt, and rain was one of them. When it rained heavily, fog would often settle in. Not the light kind that drifts here and there, but thick, dense fog that clings to the road and reduces visibility to almost nothing. The kind where your headlights don't really help much, where everything ahead of you fades into a dull gray blur. It forces you to slow down, to focus more, to stay alert in a way that feels tense without being overwhelming. On this particular day, those conditions were exactly what I was dealing with. It had been raining, and the fog was heavy enough that it changed the entire atmosphere of the drive. The road didn't feel familiar anymore, even though I had driven it countless times before. Everything looked the same, but also different, like the fog had erased all the small details that usually made it recognizable. I wasn't alone that day. A coworker was with me, someone who was used to the same routine, the same early starts and long drives. Having someone else there usually made things feel more normal, more grounded. Conversations would pass the time, even if they were quiet or half-hearted because of the early hour. But that morning felt different. It wasn't anything obvious at first. Just the conditions, the rain, the fog. The kind of situation that makes you naturally more cautious. We were both focused on the road, paying attention in a way that didn't leave much room for distraction. The drive to Sydney went as expected, slow but manageable. It was the trip back that changed things. Normally, the return journey would take around an hour. By that time, the sky would usually start to lighten slightly, even if the sun wasn't fully up yet. But on that day, the weather hadn't improved. The fog was still thick, and the rain had left the roads wet and slick. About halfway through the drive back, traffic came to a stop. At first, it wasn't clear why. There were no immediate signs, no flashing lights visible through the fog, just a gradual slowing down until everything stopped completely. Cars lined up along the road, engines idling, everyone waiting without really knowing what was ahead. Eventually, word started to spread. There had been an accident. Given the conditions, it wasn't surprising. The fog made it hard to see. The rain made the roads dangerous. It was the kind of situation where something like that felt almost inevitable. Still, knowing that didn't make the wait any less tense. We were stuck there for a while. Time passes differently when you're sitting in traffic like that, especially in poor conditions. Minutes feel longer. The stillness becomes more noticeable. There's nowhere to go, nothing to do but wait and watch the faint outlines of cars ahead of you through the fog. It was during that time that something happened. At first, I wasn't even sure I had seen anything. Out to the side of the road, beyond where the headlights reached, there was movement. Not clear movement, not something you could easily focus on, but enough to catch your attention. The fog made it hard to tell distance, shape, even size. Everything beyond a certain point just blended together into shifting gray. I looked again, trying to make sense of it. And that's when my coworker reacted too. They saw it as well. We didn't say anything immediately. Sometimes when two people notice something unusual at the same time, there's a brief hesitation, like you're both waiting to see if the other will acknowledge it first. Eventually, one of us spoke, asking if the other had seen it. The answer was yes. Whatever it was, it moved through the fog in a way that didn't feel easy to explain in the moment. It wasn't fast, but it wasn't slow either. More like a steady movement, partially hidden, just on the edge of visibility. The most logical explanation was that it was an animal. That made sense. The area had wildlife, and conditions like that could easily make something seem larger or stranger than it really was. The fog distorts shapes, changes perception. What might normally look ordinary can seem unfamiliar. But even with that explanation, something about it didn't sit right. It wasn't just what we saw, it was how it felt. There was a sudden shift in the atmosphere inside the car. A quiet kind of tension that hadn't been there before. Not panic, not fear exactly, but a sense of unease that came out of nowhere and settled in without explanation. We both felt it. That's what made it harder to ignore. If it had just been me, I could have written it off as imagination, as my mind playing tricks in difficult conditions. But having someone else react the same way without prompting made it feel different. We watched for a moment longer, trying to see it again. But whatever it was, it didn't come back into view. The fog swallowed it completely. After that, things went back to being still. Traffic eventually started moving again, slowly at first, then picking up as we passed the area where the accident had occurred. There wasn't much to see through the fog, just vague shapes and flashing lights that confirmed what we had already been told. The rest of the drive continued without anything else happening. By the time we reached our destination, it felt like just another strange moment on a long day. Something unusual, but not something you could hold on to or explain clearly. The kind of thing that fades into the background as you move on to other things. But later that day, something else came up. There had been another accident in the exact same spot. It was mentioned casually, like just another piece of information. Given the weather conditions, it wasn't shocking. Roads like that, in fog and rain, can easily lead to multiple incidents. It happens more often than people realize. Still, hearing that added something to the memory. Not in a way that proved anything. Not in a way that made the earlier moment suddenly meaningful. But enough to connect the two events in a way that lingered in the back of my mind. Even now, I don't think there was anything supernatural about what we saw. it was probably an animal. The fog, the lighting, the conditions, all of it could have played a role in how we perceived it. The human mind is good at filling in gaps, especially when visibility is limited. But at the same time, I can't ignore how it felt. That sudden sense of unease. The way both of us noticed it at the same time. The way the moment stood out from everything else that day. And then, the coincidence of what happened later. None of it proves anything. But it's just enough to make the memory stick. Because sometimes it's not about what you can clearly explain. It's about the moments where something feels slightly off, even if you never fully understand why. And those are the ones that tend to stay with you the longest. It's one of those stories that feels like it belongs to a different time. Not just because of when it happened, but because of how life was back then. The kind of work people did, the hours they kept, the quiet routines that took place while most of the world was still asleep. It's hard to imagine now, but there was a time when something like delivering milk in the middle of the night was completely normal. People depended on it, and the people doing that job became part of the background of everyday life, moving through neighborhoods before the day even began. My grandfather was one of those people. He used to deliver milk back in the 1940s, long before things became automated or replaced by modern systems. His work started early, earlier than most people would ever want to wake up. Around 4 in the morning, while everything was still dark and quiet, he would already be out on the road, making his way from one stop to the next. It was a routine he followed day after day, one that became so familiar that he didn't need to think about it anymore. Most of his deliveries were ordinary. Houses, small businesses, places where people expected him at the same time every morning. It was predictable work, steady and uneventful for the most part. But there was one stop that always felt different from the others. One of his regular customers was the caretaker of a large cemetery. Back then, it wasn't unusual for cemeteries to have someone living on the grounds, responsible for maintaining the place, watching over it, making sure everything stayed in order. The caretaker's house was actually inside the cemetery itself, set among the rows of graves and trees, separated from everything else. Even during the day, that kind of place carries a certain feeling. Not necessarily fear, but a quiet heaviness, a stillness that feels different from other places. And at 4 in the morning, when there's no light, no movement, no sound except what you bring with you, that feeling becomes something else entirely. Still, it was just another stop in his route. He had been there many times before, and over time, even a place like that can start to feel routine. You get used to it. The same way you get used to anything you see often enough. But one morning changed that. He told the story many times over the years, and from what my grandmother said, it never changed. Not in the details, not in the way he described what he saw, not in the way it affected him afterward. It was around 4 in the morning, just like always. Still dark, the kind of darkness that feels thick and heavy before the first hint of daylight starts to appear. He drove up to the cemetery, following the same path he always took, expecting everything to be exactly as it had been every other time. But something was wrong. He noticed it almost immediately. At first, it wasn't something he could clearly identify, just a sense that the place didn't look the way it should. The ground, the layout, something about it felt off, like a familiar scene that had been disturbed in a way that didn't make sense. As he got closer, that feeling turned into something clearer. Graves had been dug up. Not just one or two, but many of them. The earth had been torn open, leaving dark patches of freshly turned soil scattered across the cemetery. It wasn't neat. It wasn't careful. It looked rushed, chaotic, like whoever had done it hadn't cared about anything except getting it done as quickly as possible. Dirt was everywhere, piled up in uneven mounds, spread across the grass, covering areas that should have been clean and undisturbed. The quiet order of the cemetery had been replaced by something that felt wrong on a deeper level, something that didn't belong there. He got out of his vehicle. Even now, I sometimes wonder what made him do that. Whether it was curiosity or disbelief, or just the instinct to get a closer look when something doesn't make sense. But he stepped out and moved further in, trying to understand what he was seeing. And that's when he noticed it. In one of the disturbed graves, something was sticking out from the dirt. At first, it didn't register. The mind doesn't always process things immediately, especially when they don't fit into anything familiar. But as he looked closer, as the shape became clearer in the dim light, he realized what it was. It was the head of a child, a baby, partially uncovered with dirt still covering most of the small body beneath. Only the head was visible, emerging from the loose soil in a way that didn't look intentional, like it had been left that way in a hurry. He described it as if someone had tried to cover it back up, but hadn't taken the time to do it properly. Just a few inches of dirt, unevenly spread, not enough to hide what was there. Not enough to make it look the way it had before. It was incomplete, careless, like whoever had done it didn't want to be there any longer than necessary. That was the moment that stayed with him. On not just the sight itself, but the way it looked, the way it felt to stand there in the dark, surrounded by disturbed graves, with dirt scattered everywhere, and that one detail standing out in a way that couldn't be ignored. He didn't stay long after that. He left, reported what he had seen, and that should have been the end of it. Just another incident, something that happened and was dealt with. But some things don't end that easily, because even after everything was handled, after the cemetery was put back into order, after time passed and life continued, the memory stayed. He never forgot it. He told the story for years, not as something exaggerated or changed over time, but in the same way, with the same details, every time. My grandmother confirmed that. She said he never added anything to it. I never made it more dramatic than it already was. It was always the same. The early morning delivery, the disturbed graves, the dirt everywhere, and that one image he couldn't get out of his mind. As a child, hearing that story affected me in a way I didn't fully understand at the time. I love scary stories, the kind that give you a quick shock and then fade away. But this wasn't like that. It didn't feel like something made up. It felt heavier, more real, even if I didn't know whether to fully believe it or not. For a long time, I wasn't sure if he had been telling the truth. Part of me wondered if it was just a story, something he told because he knew I would listen, because he knew I enjoyed being scared in that safe, controlled way. It would have made sense. A lot of people do that, especially with children. But my grandmother said it was real. She said he had told the same story to other people long before I ever heard it. That he never treated it like a joke, never laughed it off, never changed the details depending on who he was talking to. That consistency is what makes it harder to dismiss completely. Even now, I don't know exactly what to believe. There are explanations, of course. There always are. Grave robbing wasn't unheard of, especially in earlier times. There could be reasons behind it, motivations that make sense in a historical context. The scene he described, as disturbing as it is, could have happened without anything supernatural involved. But knowing that doesn't make the image any easier to think about. It doesn't make the memory feel lighter. Because at the end of the day, what stays with you isn't the explanation. It's the picture that forms in your mind when you hear it. The darkness of that early morning, the silence of the cemetery, the ground torn open in a way it should never be, and that one small detail left behind in a way that suggests someone didn't have time to make things right again. More than anything, though, what stays with me now isn't just the story itself. It's the fact that it came from him, the way he used to tell it, the way his voice would stay steady even when describing something like that, the way it felt like you were being let into a memory that had never really left him. I miss that. I miss him and all the stories he used to tell. Some of them were light, some of them were strange, and some of them stayed with you long after they were over. And this was one of the ones that never really goes away. It's one of those memories that feels almost funny when you first think about it, like one of those reckless teenage decisions you laugh about later. But the more you sit with it, the more the tone shifts. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, as you start to realize how easily things could have gone in a very different direction. When I was a senior in high school, I worked at a movie theater with a group of my friends. It was one of those jobs that didn't feel like work most of the time because of the people you were around. We all had the same shifts, the same routines, and the same habit of turning even the most boring parts of the job into something entertaining. Closing late, cleaning up after the last showings, joking around while everyone else was heading home for the night. It felt like its own little world. After our shifts, we had a routine. No matter how late it was, we'd end up at the same place. A local Denny's that stayed open all night. The kind of place that felt like a second home for anyone working late hours. We'd walk in tired but wired at the same time, still carrying the energy from work, and take over a big section with a group that was usually 10 people or more. There was a waitress there we all knew. We called her Mama Lisa, not in a sarcastic way, but because she genuinely treated us like we were her kids. She'd already know what most of us wanted before we even sat down, checking in on us, making sure everyone was good, letting us stay longer than we probably should have without ever rushing us out. Those nights felt simple. Nothing complicated, nothing serious. Just food, laughter, and that feeling you get when you're young and everything seems harmless. One night, though, something shifted. It started in a way that didn't stand out at all. We were finishing up, getting ready to leave like we always did. Some of us were paying, some were still finishing drinks. The usual slow process of wrapping things up after a long night. That's when I noticed an older guy at the counter talking to the waitress. At first, I didn't pay much attention. People came and went all the time. Late-night places attract all kinds of people, and nothing about him seemed unusual enough to stand out right away. But then I caught part of the conversation. He was asking about getting a taxi. This was back in 2008, before rideshare apps were a thing. Getting a ride home wasn't as simple as pulling out your phone and tapping a screen. You either called a cab or found another way. And for some reason, without really thinking about it, I spoke up. I offered him a ride. Looking back, it sounds like the kind of decision you immediately question. But in that moment, it didn't feel strange at all. I wasn't alone. I had two friends with me, one of them a pretty big guy. It was late, but we were used to being out at that time. It felt like a harmless thing to do, like helping someone out. He accepted. At first, everything felt normal. We got into the car, and he gave directions. The conversation was casual, nothing that raised any alarms. Just small talk, the kind you'd expect in that situation. Where he was headed, how far it was, things like that. He said his place was on the other side of town. That didn't bother us. We didn't have anywhere else to be. It was a Saturday night, we had just finished work, and the idea of a longer drive didn't feel like an inconvenience. If anything, it just felt like more time to hang out. So we drove. The streets were mostly empty, the quiet kind of late-night atmosphere that makes everything feel a little slower. Streetlights passing by, the hum of the car, the occasional turn as we followed his directions. It felt like just another part of the night. But somewhere along the way, something changed. It wasn't immediate. It was subtle at first. The kind of shift you don't fully notice until you look back on it. The conversation started to feel off. Not in a way that you could clearly explain, but enough to make you slightly more aware, slightly more alert. By the time we reached the area he had directed us to, that feeling had grown. He told us to pull over across the street. We did. And that's when things got strange. He pointed to a house and said it was his. But the way he said it didn't feel natural. He kept repeating it. That's the house. Yeah, I promise, this is my house. Over and over again. There was something about the repetition that didn't sit right. People don't usually feel the need to insist like that, unless something is off. It turned what should have been a simple moment into something uncomfortable, something that made you question what was actually happening. We didn't say much. At that point, it felt like the best thing to do was just let him get out and leave. The situation hadn't escalated into anything obvious, but the atmosphere had changed enough that none of us wanted to stick around longer than necessary. He got out of the car, and instead of walking straight to the house he had pointed at, he crossed the street. That alone was enough to make things feel wrong. But then it got worse. He didn't go to the front door. He went around the side. And then, without hesitation, he jumped the back gate. Just like that. No explanation, no pause, no normal behavior that would match someone arriving at their own home. It was quick, almost rushed, like he didn't want to be seen or didn't want to waste any time. That was the moment everything clicked. Whatever normal explanation we had been holding on to disappeared. And without even really discussing it, we reacted the same way. We got out of there. Fast. No second thoughts. No waiting to see what happened next. The kind of instinctive reaction that takes over when something doesn't feel right and your body decides before your mind fully catches up. We drove away, leaving the street behind, putting distance between us and whatever that situation had been. For a while, no one said anything. The adrenaline was still there, sitting just under the surface. It's strange how your body reacts to moments like that. Even when nothing directly happens to you, even when there's no clear danger, you still feel it. That rush of awareness, of realizing that something could have gone differently. Eventually, the tension started to fade. And that's when it hit us. How stupid it had been. It's easy to feel invincible when you're young. To believe that having a couple of friends with you makes everything safe. That nothing bad is going to happen, because it never has before. But looking back on it, the reality of the situation became a lot clearer. We had picked up a complete stranger, driven him across town, and ended up in a situation that didn't make sense. Nothing happened. That's the part that makes it easy to laugh about later, to treat it like just another story. But the truth is, it could have gone differently. There were too many unknowns, too many things that didn't add up. Even now, I still think about that moment when he kept repeating himself. That's the house. I promise, this is my house. and how in that moment something shifted from normal to something else entirely. Not because of anything we could prove, but because of the feeling. That quiet realization that something wasn't right. And sometimes that's all it takes. It's one of those memories that never really settles into something simple, even as the years pass. Not because the story changes, but because your understanding of it does. When you're a child, you don't see the full picture. You only feel pieces of it. The tone in people's voices, the way things suddenly become serious, the quiet tension that replaces what was supposed to be a normal, happy day. I was around 5 years old when it happened. At that age, everything feels bigger in a different way. Not more dangerous, just more exciting. My family had gone on a camping trip with some close friends, the kind of trip that was meant to be easy and fun. Something simple, a break from routine. There were other kids there too, around my age, which made it even better. It felt like one of those moments where nothing could go wrong, where everything was built around enjoyment and small, carefree memories. Not too far from the campsite, there was a water park. That quickly became the center of everything for us kids. At that age, a place like that feels endless. Bright colors, loud sounds, water moving in every direction, people laughing, running, shouting. It creates this sense of constant motion, like nothing ever stops. You don't think about time when you're there. You don't think about anything outside of what's right in front of you. I remember the feeling more than the details. The noise, the energy, the way everything seemed alive. We were all together. My parents, my baby brother, and the friends we had come with. It felt safe in that way crowded places sometimes do. Surrounded by people, by movement, by noise. The kind of environment where nothing dangerous seems like it could happen. But at some point, something shifted. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. My younger brother started getting restless. He was still very young, and places like that can be overwhelming for a baby. The noise, the crowd, the constant stimulation. It became too much for him. And my mom decided it would be better to take him back to the camper so he could calm down and rest. It didn't seem like a big deal. The campsite wasn't far. Close enough that it felt like a simple walk, something that could be done without much thought. So she left, carrying him, stepping away from the noise and the crowd, heading back along the path that led through a quieter area. At first, everything was normal, the kind of quiet that comes when you step away from a crowded place. The sounds fade behind you, replaced by something softer, more distant. The path wasn't completely empty, but it wasn't busy either. Just a few people here and there moving in different directions, not paying much attention to each other. That's when she noticed him. A man walking behind her. At first, it didn't mean anything. People share paths all the time. It's normal. But something about him didn't sit right. Not something obvious, not something she could point to immediately. Just a feeling. A quiet sense that something was off. She kept walking, trying to ignore it, trying to convince herself it was nothing. But that feeling didn't go away. It stayed there, just under the surface, growing slowly into something harder to dismiss. So she picked up her pace, just slightly at first, enough to create a little distance, enough to see if it was just coincidence. He matched her. That's when it changed. That's when it stopped feeling like nothing. It wasn't just that he was behind her anymore. It was that he was adjusting himself to stay there, keeping the same distance, closing it slowly, deliberately. That's when the situation became real in a way that couldn't be ignored. She didn't panic. Not outwardly. She couldn't afford to. She was carrying my brother, responsible for keeping him safe, and panic wouldn't help. So she kept moving, trying to stay calm, trying to think without letting fear take over. But inside, she knew something wasn't right. The man got closer, step by step, until he was no longer just behind her, but beside her. And that's when she saw it. The knife. He wasn't hiding it. He wasn't trying to conceal anything. He held it openly, casually, like it was something ordinary, like it belonged in that moment. Then he spoke. "Do you like my knife?" The way he said it wasn't normal. It wasn't a question in the way people usually ask questions. It was something else, something that carried weight behind it, something that felt like it was testing her reaction. He held the knife close to his face, almost admiring it. My mom didn't respond the way fear might have made someone respond. She didn't react strongly, didn't show panic, didn't give him anything to feed off of. She stayed neutral, a small shrug, avoiding eye contact, acting like it didn't matter, like it wasn't worth reacting to. It was a choice made in seconds, but it was the right one. Giving him attention, giving him fear, might have changed everything. He kept talking. He said he had a new axe. Then he pointed toward the trees. "I'm going to go chop down a tree over there." The words were simple, but the way he said them wasn't. There was something underneath them, something that made it clear this wasn't just a casual comment. It felt like a warning, or maybe a suggestion of what he was capable of. Then, without anything else, he turned and walked away, straight toward the woods. The moment he created that distance, my mom moved. Faster now, more urgently, but still controlled. She didn't run. She didn't draw attention. She just moved with purpose, putting space between herself and whatever that moment had been. As she made her way back, she heard it. The sound of chopping, slow, steady, coming from the direction he had gone. Each strike spaced out, deliberate, not rushed, not random, just consistent, echoing faintly through the trees. There's no way to know what he was actually doing, whether he really was cutting wood, or if it was something else entirely. But hearing it, knowing he was there, made the entire situation feel heavier, more real. When she got back to us, everything changed. She told my dad what had happened, and it was no longer something to question or downplay. It was serious, immediate, something that needed to be reported, and it was. Not long after, more information came out. There had been reports from a nearby town. The man was found, and what they learned about him made everything feel even closer than it already had. He had escaped from prison. He had a history of kidnapping and weapons charges. This wasn't just a strange encounter with someone acting oddly. This was someone dangerous. Someone who had already done things that crossed the line most people never even come close to. The police told my mom something simple, but something that stayed with her. Always trust your gut. Because that feeling she had, before anything happened, before there was any clear reason to be afraid, that instinct was what kept her aware. What made her change her pace? What made her stay controlled instead of reacting emotionally? That instinct made the difference. We left the campsite the next morning. There wasn't any hesitation about it. No discussion about staying longer. Whatever sense of safety had been there before was gone. As a child, I didn't fully understand why. I just knew something had changed. That the adults were quieter, more serious. That something had happened that made everything feel different. It wasn't until I got older that the weight of it really settled in. How close it could have been to something worse. How small decisions in moments like that can shape everything that comes after. and how sometimes the only warning you get is something you can't explain. A feeling, a quiet voice that tells you something isn't right, and the choice to listen to it, even when you don't fully understand why. Because sometimes that's the only thing standing between an ordinary day and a moment that changes everything. It's one of those nights that feels careless and harmless while it's happening. The kind of night you don't think twice about until much later. At the time, it just feels like part of being young, staying out too late, walking home when you probably shouldn't be, not really thinking about anything beyond getting back and sleeping it off. I was coming back from a high school party on the other side of town. It was late, or early, depending on how you look at it, around 4:30 in the morning. That strange hour where the night hasn't fully ended, but the day is already starting to push its way in. The sky was getting lighter, just enough to outline things in a dull gray, and there were signs of life starting again. A car here and there, the occasional jogger already out, people beginning their routines while I was still coming down from mine. I had an almost empty bottle of rum with me. At the time, it didn't feel like a big deal, but even in that half-dazed state, I knew it was something I didn't want to be caught with. Underage, still not fully sober, walking alone. It didn't take much imagination to picture how that situation could go wrong if the wrong person noticed. So I decided to get rid of it. Not in a dramatic way, just something quick and easy. The street I was on dipped into a small underpass where a train line crossed overhead. It was one of those places I'd known since I was a kid. I even remembered this small, random thing my mom used to say whenever we drove under it, telling me to reach up and touch the roof for good luck if a train was passing. For some reason, that memory came back to me right then. So I buried the bottle in a pile of leaves just before the underpass, almost like some stupid version of that same idea. A small, pointless act that felt like it carried some kind of meaning in the moment, even though it really didn't. Then I kept walking. The underpass itself felt the same as it always had. Narrow, a little darker than the rest of the street. The sound of your footsteps echoing slightly as you moved through it. Nothing unusual. Nothing that stood out. That's when the van passed me. It came up from behind, moving fast. Too fast for that kind of road. It was one of those plain white cargo vans, no markings, nothing to identify it. The kind of vehicle that doesn't stand out during the day, but at that hour, in that setting, it felt different. I noticed it, but only for a second. My first thought wasn't fear. It was something stupid, something small. I remember thinking, half-jokingly, that I hoped they hadn't seen me bury the bottle. Then I let it go. They were moving quickly, clearly in a hurry, and within seconds they were gone. Or at least, that's what I thought. I kept walking. The street opened up a bit past the underpass. More space, more visibility. With the light coming in and a few people already out. It didn't feel like a situation where anything strange would happen. That sense of normalcy, even if it was thin, was enough to keep me relaxed. Then I saw the van again. About 100 yards up the road, it suddenly turned. Not slowly, not casually. It whipped around fast, a sharp U-turn that didn't look controlled or normal. It was aggressive, deliberate. And then it started coming back, straight toward me. That's the moment everything changed. There's a point where your body reacts before your mind has time to catch up. And that was it. 1 second, I was just walking. The next, everything inside me tightened. Every instinct shifted at once. The van wasn't just passing by. It was coming back for me. It closed the distance quickly and then stopped hard, the sound of it cutting through the quiet of the morning. Before I could fully process what was happening, the passenger door opened and a man got out. That's when the situation became real. Not uncertain, not questionable, real. I didn't wait to see what he was going to do. On one side of the road was a large, open field. Flat, exposed, nowhere to hide. On the other side was a river. Neither option felt safe. Running into the field would leave me completely visible, and if the van followed, there would be nowhere to go. I moved toward the field at first, almost automatically. Then I stopped. In that split second, something clicked. That wasn't the way out. I turned back. The underpass was behind me, the same one I had just walked through. Without really thinking, I ran toward it, then scrambled up the side, pulling myself up onto the train tracks above. It wasn't smooth, it wasn't planned, just instinct and adrenaline pushing me forward. And then I ran, along the tracks, away from the road, away from the van, away from whatever was happening behind me. I remember thinking something like, it is what it is, but not in a calm way. More like a forced acceptance that I had no better option. At that point, everything else dropped away. No more alcohol in my system, no more hesitation. Just focus. I knew I could run. That was the one advantage I had. If it came down to it, if it stayed on foot, I had a chance to get away. That thought kept me moving, pushing harder, faster, putting as much distance between me and that moment as I could. After about a minute, I looked back. I shouldn't have, but I did. And he was there, running, still coming after me. That was the moment the fear really hit. Up until then, there had still been a part of me trying to rationalize it, trying to believe it might not be what it looked like. But seeing him there, still chasing, removed all of that. There was no misunderstanding, no coincidence. He was coming for me. I pushed harder. Faster than I thought I could go, ignoring everything except the need to keep moving. My breathing, the sound of my feet hitting the tracks, the space ahead of me. Nothing else mattered. Eventually, I couldn't hear him anymore. That didn't mean he was gone, just that I couldn't hear him. I slowed down, not stopping completely, just enough to get some control back. My body was starting to catch up with me. The exhaustion creeping in now that the initial surge of adrenaline was fading. That's when I saw a place to hide. There was a small dip off the side of the tracks, about 10 feet down, covered in loose gravel and surrounded by thick brush. It wasn't much, but it was something. Somewhere out of sight. I slid down into it, carefully, quietly, trying not to make noise. Then I stayed still, crouched low, using the bushes for cover. Every part of me focused on being invisible. The area was isolated. No houses, no people, nothing nearby. Just the tracks and the trees. In that moment, it felt completely cut off from everything else. Like I had stepped out of the world I knew and into something else entirely. I waited, trying to slow my breathing, trying to listen for any sign that he was still there. And then I saw him. He came out from the trees on the other side of the tracks. Not far. Maybe 50 feet away. Close enough that I could see his shape clearly, even in the dim light. Close enough that there was no question anymore. He was holding something. I couldn't tell what it was. A weapon, definitely. But whether it was a knife, a gun, something else, I don't know. The image is burned into my memory, but blurred at the same time, like my brain refused to focus on it completely. The moment I saw him, I dropped my head down, instantly, as low as I could get, making myself as small as possible. Not moving, not making a sound. Just waiting, hoping that he hadn't seen me. Time stretched out. Seconds felt longer than they should have. Every small sound, every shift in the air felt amplified. I was completely aware of everything and at the same time unable to do anything except stay still. I genuinely thought that was it, that this was where it was going to happen. Not in some dramatic, drawn-out way, just suddenly, quietly, in a place where no one would see. After what felt like forever, I looked up again, slowly, carefully. He was gone. No sound, no movement, nothing to show where he had gone or why he had stopped. Just empty space where he had been moments before. I didn't wait. I stayed there a little longer just to be sure, then climbed back up and made my way out as quickly as I could, heading toward more populated areas, not stopping until I felt like I was somewhere safer. Nothing else happened after that. No explanation, no closure, just the memory. It's easy for people to doubt stories like this, to assume there's another explanation, that something was misunderstood or exaggerated. And maybe that's fair, from the outside. But what people don't always understand is that things like this don't need to make perfect sense to be real. Weird things happen, quietly in places you wouldn't expect, at times when most people aren't paying attention. And sometimes you only realize how serious it was after it's already over, after the adrenaline fades, after you've had time to think about how easily it could have ended differently. That was the first time I ever felt something like that. And it's not something you forget. It was summer break, the kind of time when days blurred into each other and nights stretched longer than they should. I was about 11 years old enough to feel independent in small ways, but still young enough to not fully understand how quickly things could turn. That night felt like any other at first. The house was quiet, the kind of deep quiet that settles in after everyone has gone to sleep. I was in the basement, sitting on the floor in front of the TV, playing PlayStation sometime around 1 or 2 in the morning. I remember being completely absorbed in the game, the soft glow of the screen lighting up the room around me. The basement always felt a little separate from the rest of the house, almost like its own world. Down there, it was easy to forget how late it had gotten. Easy to forget that everyone else was asleep 2 floors above me. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the dog. At first, it didn't even register properly. It cut through the silence so suddenly that it felt out of place, like something didn't belong. Our dog was a German shepherd, strong, alert, but not the kind of dog that barked for no reason. He wasn't noisy, and he definitely didn't lose control like that. But what I heard wasn't normal barking. It was loud, aggressive, full-throated. The kind of barking that didn't stop. Even from the basement, I could hear him clearly. He was upstairs in my parents' bedroom, 2 floors above me, but it sounded like he was right there. There was something urgent in it, something sharp that made it impossible to ignore. I paused the game without really thinking about it, just listening. He kept going. Seconds passed, maybe a minute, maybe a little more. It's hard to measure time when something feels off like that. I remember sitting there, trying to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe he heard something outside. Maybe it was just a noise. But deep down, it didn't feel like that. It felt different. That's when I decided to go upstairs. I stood up slowly at first, still listening, and then started moving toward the basement stairs. Each step up felt heavier than it should have. The house was still dark, still quiet except for the barking. It echoed in a way that made everything feel tense. When I reached the top of the basement stairs, I stepped into the kitchen. And that's when everything changed. Through the glass of the sliding door, I saw them. 3 men. They were right outside, standing close to the door, trying to pry it open. For a second, my brain didn't even process what I was seeing. It was like my mind refused to accept it. People weren't supposed to be there. Not at that time, not like that. It didn't make sense. I froze. They saw me almost immediately. There was no time to react, no time to think. One of them turned, and I saw the movement of his arm as he swung something, a metal rod, and the glass door shattered. The sound was violent, sharp, louder than anything I'd ever heard inside the house. Glass exploded inward, fragments scattering across the floor. That's when my body finally reacted. I ran. I didn't think about where I was going. I just moved. Through the dining room, past the table, straight into the living room. My feet barely felt like they were touching the ground. Everything was happening too fast. But at the same time, like every detail felt stretched out. From the back of the house, you could see straight through to the front. I knew that layout without ever having to think about it. There was a small wall near the stairs, just enough to break the line of sight slightly, but not enough to hide behind. I was heading for the stairs, and then I heard it. A gunshot. It was louder than anything else, a sharp crack that seemed to split the air itself. At the same time, I heard something else, a strange buzzing sound, like something cutting through the air at high speed. I didn't understand it in the moment, but later I would realize what it was. The bullet passed close enough that I could hear it. Something hit the wall near me. Drywall dust burst into the air, and a picture frame nearby shattered, glass spraying outwards. It happened just a few feet away from where I was running. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Right as I reached the stairs, something rushed past me. It was the dog. He moved so fast that it barely registered at first. 1 second, he wasn't there. The next, he was flying past me, heading straight toward the kitchen, toward the men. There was no hesitation in him, no fear, just instinct. At the same time, I heard my dad. His bedroom door open, and I heard the distinct sound of a rifle being readied. It was a sound I had heard before, but never like that. Never in that context. There was something final about it, something that made it clear that whatever was happening had crossed into something serious. I started up the stairs. Halfway up, I saw a light coming from the top. A flashlight. It cut through the darkness, blinding for a second as it pointed down toward me. I couldn't see anything beyond it. Just that beam of light. I yelled out, "Dad!" His voice came back immediately, loud and sharp. "Get in our room. Protect your mother." There was no hesitation in his voice, no uncertainty, just a command. We crossed paths on the stairs for a split second. I remember the feeling of it, how close we were, how everything seemed to compress into that moment. Behind me, I could hear the men moving inside, stepping over broken glass, pushing into the house. Then I heard something else, a deep, aggressive snarl from the dog. It was followed by a scream, then more gunshots, and then silence. It all happened in seconds. I kept moving. I reached my parents' bedroom and pushed the door open. My mom was already awake, already on the phone with emergency services. She was crying, her voice shaking as she tried to explain what was happening. I could hear everything and nothing at the same time. My ears were ringing from the gunshots. I grabbed my dad's shotgun. I don't even remember making the decision to do it. I just did. I moved to the far side of the bed, pointing it toward the door, trying to steady my hands. Then the noise started again. More gunshots. So many that it was impossible to count them. The rifle had a sharp, cracking sound, fast and controlled. The pistols sounded different, heavier in a way, echoing as multiple shots went off at the same time. It created this overwhelming mix of noise that filled the house. It felt like it went on forever. In reality, it was probably only a few seconds. Then everything stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. It pressed in from all sides, thick and heavy. My ears were still ringing, making everything feel distant and unreal. We stayed there. My mom still on the phone, me holding the shotgun, both of us frozen in a place. Time stretched. It felt like hours, even though it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. Then we heard it. Footsteps on the stairs. Slow. Deliberate. Each step seemed louder than it should have been. My grip tightened on the shotgun, but I knew deep down that I wasn't really in control. I was just holding on, waiting. Step. Step. Then my dad's voice. Call 911. My mom broke down completely at that point, crying harder, trying to speak into the phone. A few seconds later, he appeared in the doorway. I remember the first thing I noticed was his shirt. It was covered in blood, dark and spreading from his shoulder. But he was standing. He was steady. He looked at us and said calmly, "Wait here until the police get here. It's over. We're safe. I'll be downstairs." His voice didn't match the situation. It was too controlled, too steady, like he was forcing everything into order. Then he turned and walked out. We could hear sirens in the distance now, growing louder, getting closer. I stayed where I was, still holding the shotgun, still staring at the door, even though everything had gone quiet again. Later, we found out what had happened. My dad had killed 2 of the men. The third one had been wounded. At the time, it was explained as a break-in. Something random, something that just happened. That's how it was treated, at least on the surface. But years later, when I was older, my dad told me the truth. It wasn't random. It wasn't a mistake. And somehow knowing that made it feel even worse. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. I remember that visit clearly, even though at the time it didn't feel like anything special was supposed to happen. It was just another trip to my grandparents' house, something I had done many times before. Their place was a little different from most homes, though. They had built it themselves, out in a quiet area that was surrounded by trees and open land. It wasn't completely isolated, but it felt like it. The kind of place where the outside world seemed a little farther away than usual. The house itself had a certain warmth to it. The kind that comes from people putting their own time and effort into building something from the ground up. You could feel that it wasn't just another house. It had history in it, even in the small details. The woodwork, the layout, the way everything fit together, it all felt personal. And one of the things that stood out the most was the living room downstairs. Instead of a normal wall, there were these huge windows that stretched almost from one end to the other. It was like the wall itself had been replaced by glass. During the day, it let in a lot of light, making the room feel open and connected to the outside. At night, though, it was different. At night, those same windows felt like something else entirely. Through them, you could see a wide open area that sloped gently away from the house. It wasn't a perfectly clean or maintained space. It was more natural than that. There were patches of brush, small trees growing unevenly, and a narrow creek cutting through the middle. It wasn't deep or fast, just a quiet line of water that moved through the land. There wasn't much out there, at least nothing obvious. No large animals, nothing that stood out as a threat. It was just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels normal during the day, but a little too still when you really think about it. The morning it happened started off wrong. I woke up with a migraine, the kind that makes everything feel heavier and harder to deal with. Light feels too bright, sounds feel too sharp, and even small movements take effort. I didn't feel like doing anything, let alone getting ready to go out. My grandparents were getting ready for church, moving around upstairs in that calm, routine way that people do when they've done the same thing every week for years. When they saw how I was feeling, they told me I could stay home and rest. At the time, that felt like a relief. I just wanted quiet. After they left, the house felt different. It wasn't loud before, but there had always been some kind of background noise. The sound of movement, small conversations, the feeling that someone else was there. Once they were gone, all of that disappeared. The silence settled in quickly, filling the space in a way that made everything feel larger and emptier. I stayed in bed for a while, trying to let the headache pass. Eventually it eased just enough for me to get up. My mouth was dry, and I wanted water more than anything else. I made my way downstairs slowly. The living room was filled with daylight, the big windows letting in soft light that spread across the floor. For a moment, everything felt normal again. Quiet, but not in a bad way. Just still. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a glass, and filled it with water. I remember standing there for a second, just holding it, letting things settle. That's when I heard it. A sharp cracking sound. It came from outside, somewhere beyond the windows. It wasn't loud enough to be explosive, but it was clear. Something had broken. Something solid. I froze. A second later, there was a yell. It wasn't a clear word, not something I could understand. Just a rough, sudden sound that didn't belong. It didn't sound like my grandparents. And it definitely didn't sound like anything that should have been out there. My body reacted before my mind caught up. I turned toward the windows. At first, I didn't see anything. The open area looked the same as it always did. The brush, the small trees, the creek. It was all still there, unchanged. But something felt off. Something had changed, even if I couldn't see it right away. Then I noticed one of the small trees. It was down. Not bent, not leaning. Down, like it had been pushed or broken. It hadn't been like that before. I was sure of it. And then I saw it. A figure. It was moving through the brush just beyond where the tree had fallen. At first, it didn't make sense. It didn't look like anything familiar. It was too large, too dark. A solid shape against the lighter background of the trees. It moved in a way that felt heavy. Not fast, not rushing, just steady. I remember trying to understand what I was looking at. My brain went through possibilities automatically. Maybe it was an animal, but it didn't look like one. There weren't any bears in that area, nothing that big, nothing that would move like that. It was tall, broad, and completely black, or at least dark enough that I couldn't make out any detail. No face, no features, just a shape. For a few seconds, I stood there, staring. It didn't seem to notice me, or maybe it did and just didn't react. It kept moving through the brush, pushing past the smaller plants, stepping over uneven ground like it didn't matter. Then it disappeared. Not in a dramatic way. It just moved far enough into the trees that I couldn't see it anymore. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, hidden by the density of the forest beyond. I stayed where I was. My glass of water was still in my hand, but I wasn't thinking about it anymore. Everything felt wrong. Not loud or chaotic, just wrong in a quiet, steady way that settled deep in my chest. There was this feeling that came over me. Not panic, not even fear in the way you usually think about it. It was something more instinctive. like a clear, simple thought that didn't need explaining. Go upstairs, don't stay here. I didn't question it. I turned and walked quickly back toward the stairs. I didn't run, but I didn't move slowly either. Every step felt deliberate, like I was trying not to draw attention to myself, even though I didn't know if there was anything there to notice me. Once I got upstairs, I went straight into the bedroom and closed the door. I stayed there. I didn't go back down. I didn't look out the windows again. For the rest of the time, I was alone in that house. I stayed upstairs, waiting for my grandparents to come back. The silence felt heavier now, not peaceful anymore. Every small sound made me tense, even though nothing else happened. When they finally returned, everything felt normal again on the surface. The house filled with noise, movement, familiar voices. It should have been comforting, but it wasn't. I told them I wanted to go home. I didn't try to explain everything. I don't even think I could have explained it properly at the time. I just knew I didn't want to stay there anymore. They could tell something had shaken me, even if they didn't fully understand what it was. We left earlier than planned. Even after I got home, the feeling stayed with me. It wasn't just about what I had seen. It was about how it felt in that moment. The silence, the movement, the way that figure didn't fit into anything I could explain. For a long time after that, I couldn't look out of windows the same way, especially large ones. There was always this thought in the back of my mind, quiet but persistent, that maybe just beyond the glass, there could be something there, something you don't expect, something that doesn't belong. I remember it in a way that feels soft around the edges, like something from very early childhood that never completely disappeared, even as most other memories from that time slowly faded away. I was only about 2 or 3 years old at that age where imagination and reality blend together so easily that you don't really question anything. At that point in life, the world is simple. You don't analyze things or look for explanations. You just accept what's there. The house we lived in back then wasn't very big, but to me it felt like it had its own hidden places. When you're that young, even small spaces can feel special, like they belong only to you. One of those places for me was the space under the kitchen sink. Looking back, it sounds strange. It's not the kind of place anyone would think of as comforting. It was dark, enclosed, filled with pipes and cleaning supplies. But to me, it felt like a little private world. It was quiet under there, cut off from everything else going on in the house. It felt safe in a way I can't fully explain. That's where I used to go, and that's where I would meet her. I don't remember when it started. There's no clear first moment in my mind where she appeared. It just felt like she had always been there, like she was a normal part of that space, something that existed alongside everything else. At that age, I didn't question it. I didn't stop to think about how or why she was there. She was a little girl, around my age, maybe a bit older. It's strange because I can't clearly picture her face anymore. That detail is gone, blurred out by time. But I remember how she felt. She was kind, gentle. Being around her felt easy. I like being around someone you don't have to think about. We would sit under the sink together. In my memory, it feels like we spent a long time there, talking and playing. But in reality, it was probably just short moments spread across different days. When you're that young, time doesn't feel the same. A few minutes can feel like something much bigger. She would tell me stories. That's the part I remember most clearly. They were simple stories, nothing complicated. The kind of things a child would come up with. Little funny situations. Things that didn't really need to make sense. Sometimes she would tell jokes. I don't remember the actual words, but I remember laughing. I remember feeling happy in a very simple, pure way. It never felt strange to me. There was no fear, no confusion. I didn't think about why she was there or why we always met in that same small space. It just felt normal, like something that was part of my everyday life. That day started the same as all the others. I went into the kitchen and crawled under the sink. It was quiet, dim, just like always. I remember talking, laughing, completely focused on being there with her, like nothing else existed outside of that space. Then I heard something. Footsteps. They were coming closer, moving through the house. Before I could really react, the cabinet door opened. The light from the kitchen suddenly filled the space, and it felt harsh after being in the dark. It broke the moment instantly, like something fragile had been interrupted. My mom was there. She pulled me out quickly, faster than I expected. Her reaction confused me right away. She didn't seem calm or amused like a parent might when they find a child hiding in an unusual place. She looked worried. Not just surprised, but genuinely alarmed. She asked me why I was being so loud, why I was under there. I didn't understand what she meant. To me, everything had been normal. I told her I was just playing, that we were having fun, that I was with my friend. I remember turning my head and looking back into the cabinet. She wasn't there anymore. There was nothing, just the pipes. The cleaning bottles, the same small space it had always been. It looked completely empty, like no one had ever been there. But I knew she had been. I said that out loud. And when I did, something in my mom's expression changed. It wasn't confusion. It was something heavier, something more serious than that. She didn't react the way someone would if they thought a child was just pretending. There was something in her face that I didn't understand at the time. She didn't ask many questions right then. Instead, she took me to my room. I remember the way she spoke to me. Her voice wasn't angry, but it was firm in a way that made it clear she meant every word. She told me not to play under the sink again. Not ever. And she told me not to talk to that friend anymore. At that age, I didn't understand why. It didn't feel fair. I hadn't done anything wrong. I was just playing, just doing something that made me happy. I didn't understand why something that felt so normal to me was suddenly being treated like it shouldn't exist. But I listened. I was young enough to follow what she said without questioning it too much. I stopped going under the sink. I stopped talking to my friend. And just like that, she was gone. There wasn't any goodbye, no final moment where I understood what was happening. She just stopped being there, like she had only ever existed in that one small space and nowhere else. As I grew older, the memory stayed with me. Other early memories faded, became unclear, or disappeared completely. But this one didn't. It stayed in a way that felt different. It didn't feel like a dream or something imagined. It felt consistent. The details didn't change when I thought about it. The feeling of it stayed the same. For a long time, I didn't think too deeply about it. It was just something that had happened when I was very young. Something strange, but easy enough to push aside as imagination. That's what people expect, after all. That children create things. That they fill empty spaces with stories and invisible friends. But then, later on, I learned something about that house. It didn't come up right away. It was something I heard years later, maybe in conversation. Maybe from my parents when I was old enough to understand more. It wasn't presented in a dramatic way. Just a piece of information about the past. A little girl had died there. There had been a fire, years before we ever lived in that house, and during that fire, she had hidden under the kitchen sink. That's where they found her. When I heard that, something inside me went completely still. It wasn't a loud reaction. It wasn't panic or fear. It was something quieter than that. A realization that settled in slowly but completely. The place, the age, the feeling. Everything lined up in a way that was hard to ignore. I never saw her again after that day. There were no more moments under the sink, no more stories, no more laughter in that small, quiet space. It ended as suddenly as it had begun. But the memory never left. Even now, when I think back on it, what stays with me the most isn't fear. It's how normal it felt, how natural it seemed to sit there talking and laughing like it was just another part of life, like there was nothing unusual about it at all, like I wasn't alone. I was about 6 years old when it happened, at an age where the world still feels simple and safe in a way you don't really question. Back then, I didn't think about danger the way adults do. I trusted things easily. If someone older was around, I assumed everything was fine. Small decisions didn't feel important, and nothing ever seemed like it could turn into something serious. That night started like any other quiet evening, but it felt a little different because my parents had gone out. It wasn't unusual for them to leave us at home, but this time my older sister was in charge and she had invited her friends over. There were around 6 girls in total, all of them about 15 or 16 years old. To me, they felt grown up. Not quite adults, but close enough that I looked up to them without thinking. They were loud in a way that filled the house with energy, laughing, talking over each other, joking about things I didn't fully understand. Their voices echoed through the rooms, mixing with music playing somewhere in the background. The whole house felt alive in a way it usually didn't. It felt exciting, like something special was happening. I stayed close to them most of the time, following them from room to room. I didn't want to be left out. Even if I didn't understand everything they were saying, I liked being there, feeling included in something bigger than myself. There was comfort in the noise, in the movement, in the idea that there were so many people around. At that age, being surrounded by older kids made everything feel safe. At some point during the night, they decided to order pizza. It became the center of attention almost immediately. The idea of it brought a kind of excitement that only simple things can create when you're young. Everyone started talking about it at once. What toppings to get, how long it would take, how hungry they were. It turned into a small event, something to look forward to. After placing the order, the waiting began. Time seemed to slow down in that strange way it does when you're anticipating something. Every few minutes, someone would check the time or look out the window. There was a kind of shared impatience in the room, but it felt light, harmless. Eventually, we all ended up gathered in the living room near the front window. I remember how crowded it felt. Everyone standing close together, leaning slightly forward, trying to be the first to spot the delivery car. Outside, it was dark. The street was quiet, almost completely still. The contrast between the calm outside and the noise inside made it feel like 2 separate worlds. Inside was bright, warm, full of voices. Outside was silent and distant. Then we saw headlights. A car pulled up nearby, and we noticed someone getting out. From where we were standing, it looked exactly like what we expected. A person arriving, walking toward the house, carrying something. There was no reason to question it. Everything about it matched what we had been waiting for. Excitement spread through the room instantly. Someone called out first, then others joined in. We started waving, trying to get their attention through the window. I remember doing it too, copying what the others were doing without thinking. It felt normal. It felt harmless. The front door was open. Someone stepped forward, calling out something like, "Over here," trying to guide them in. It all felt routine, like something that had probably happened dozens of times before in other houses, other nights. But the moment the door opened, something shifted. It was subtle at first. Not something you could point to right away, but enough to make everything feel slightly off. It wasn't just one person standing there. There were more. At first, it was hard to tell how many. The darkness made it difficult to see clearly. And for a second, it was like my brain didn't want to understand what I was looking at. But then it became obvious. There weren't one or two people. There were many. Around 8, maybe more. And they weren't holding pizza. They weren't smiling or speaking the way a delivery person would. Before anyone could react properly, they started moving. They spread out quickly, like they had already decided what they were going to do. Some moved toward the windows, others toward different sides of the house. Hands hit the glass hard, sudden loud bangs that shattered the calm of the moment. The energy in the room changed instantly. The excitement disappeared, replaced by confusion, then fear. Everything that had felt normal just seconds before now felt wrong. I remember standing there, completely still for a moment. My mind couldn't catch up with what was happening. It didn't make sense. People weren't supposed to act like that, not at our house, not in a quiet neighborhood like ours. It felt like something that belonged somewhere else, something distant, not something happening right in front of me. But it was real. They started trying to get inside. The front door, the windows, anywhere they could reach. The sound of it filled the house, glass rattling in its frame, fists hitting surfaces, voices raised in a way that didn't sound friendly or normal. It was loud and chaotic, overwhelming in a way that made it hard to think. Fear settled in fully then. Not the kind of fear you feel from a bad dream, but something sharper, more immediate. The kind that makes your body react before your mind understands why. My sister moved first. While the rest of us were still trying to process what was happening, she acted. I remember seeing her turn quickly and head toward the back of the house. Later, I realized she must have been thinking about the back door, making sure it was locked. At the time, I didn't understand. Everything was happening too fast. She reached the back door just as it swung open. They were already there. In a single moment, everything got worse. They didn't hesitate. They pushed inside, one after another, filling the space that had felt safe just minutes earlier. The house changed instantly. It no longer felt like ours. It felt exposed, like there was nowhere left to go. I was in the kitchen when it happened. And that's when I broke. I started screaming. Not just crying, not just calling for help. It was something deeper than that. Pure panic, uncontrolled and loud. The kind of reaction that comes from fear you don't know how to handle. I didn't understand what they wanted or what they were going to do, but I knew it wasn't good. The noise, the movement, the sudden presence of strangers. It was too much all at once. Everything felt out of control. But somehow my sister stayed calm. Even now, thinking back on it, and that's the part that stands out the most. She was only a teenager herself, not much older than the others in the house, but in that moment, she didn't panic the way I did. She didn't freeze. She stepped forward. I remember her voice cutting through the chaos. Clear, firm. She told them to stop. She said that I was scared, that there was a child in the house, and that they needed to leave. She said that if they didn't, we would call the police. There was something about the way she said it. It wasn't weak or desperate. It wasn't pleading. It sounded controlled, like she believed what she was saying and expected them to listen. For a moment, everything paused. The noise faded just enough for that silence to feel heavy. And then, just as suddenly as they had come in, they stopped. There was no argument, no shouting back, no escalation. They backed away. One by one, they turned and moved toward the door. Within seconds, they were gone. The same way they had entered, fast and without warning. The house fell quiet again. It didn't feel real. 1 second, they had been everywhere. The next, they were gone, leaving behind nothing but the echo of what had just happened. We stood there, not moving, trying to understand it. The front door was still open. Cool night air drifted inside, making everything feel colder than before. The house didn't feel the same anymore. Even though nothing seemed broken, something had changed. The feeling of safety was gone. I don't remember exactly what happened right after that. It becomes unclear, like parts of the memory faded or blended together. I know there was shock, confusion, people talking all at once, trying to make sense of it. Maybe someone called our parents. Maybe the police were involved. Those details don't stay as clearly. What stayed was the feeling, the moment when everything shifted, because it didn't start as something dangerous. It started with something small, waiting for food, looking out a window, seeing someone arrive, waving, opening the door without thinking twice. At the time, it felt harmless. The kind of thing anyone would do without hesitation, especially in a house full of people where nothing felt threatening. But that one small decision changed everything. Looking back now, the lesson feels obvious in a way it didn't then. You don't open the door for people you don't know. You don't assume that what you expect is what's actually there. And you make sure that every way into your home is secure, even when everything feels safe. Because sometimes it only takes a few seconds for something ordinary to turn into something you never forget. There were 2 girls who used to work at the Costco near my house, and even back then, something about them always stood out in a way that was hard to ignore. Their job seemed simple. They stayed in the clothing section, quietly folding and organizing items, making sure everything looked neat. They didn't move around the store much, didn't interact with customers, and as far as I ever saw, they only really spoke to each other. It wasn't just their behavior, though. It was how they looked. They wore long, plain dresses that didn't match anything you'd normally see in a place like that. The style was very specific, modest in a way that felt out of place in a big retail store. It gave off a strong Mennonite or old religious community kind of feeling. The kind of clothing that makes you immediately think of a completely different lifestyle. A one that doesn't usually exist side by side with everyday modern life. And that was the strange part. We didn't live anywhere near Amish country or any kind of traditional religious community like that. There was no obvious reason for them to be there, working in that environment, dressed the way they were, keeping so much to themselves. They didn't smile at customers, didn't greet anyone, didn't even seem to acknowledge the rest of the store most of the time. They just worked quietly, side by side, almost like they were in their own separate world. It wasn't creepy in an obvious way, but it was noticeable enough that people paid attention. When they suddenly stopped showing up, it didn't go unnoticed. At first, it was just one of those small observations. Someone mentioning they hadn't seen them in a while. Then a few more people noticed. The clothing section was still there, still being managed, but it didn't feel the same. Something about their absence stood out more than it should have for 2 employees most people never even spoke to. That's when I first heard the story. It didn't come from a direct source, not from someone deeply involved, but from someone I worked with. They told me that their dad, or maybe their brother, had lived next door to those girls. Even the way they told it felt uncertain, like pieces of the story had been passed along and slightly blurred over time. According to them, the girls didn't just live together. There were more of them. The house next door wasn't a normal family home. It was filled with girls who dressed exactly the same, acted the same way, kept to themselves in the same quiet, controlled way. And there was one man who lived there too. He almost never left. That detail stuck with me more than anything else. A house full of women who all behaved the same way, and one man who stayed inside, rarely seen. It already sounded strange, but not necessarily dangerous. Just unusual enough to make you wonder what was going on behind closed doors. The neighbor didn't interact with them much. From what I heard, he kept his distance. Maybe he tried to be polite at first, the way people do when they move into a new area, but when it became clear that they weren't interested in normal conversation or interaction, he stopped trying. They were just there, quiet neighbors, living their lives in a way that didn't involve anyone else. Then one day, everything changed. The neighbor got a phone call. It wasn't from anyone he knew, just a random call that caught him off guard. The person on the other end asked if he knew the people living next door. From the way it was described, it didn't sound like a casual question. It sounded direct, almost urgent. The neighbor hesitated. He didn't want to get involved in anything. As far as he was concerned, they were just strange neighbors. He said something along the lines of, they're kind of weird, but I don't really talk to them. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. The person on the phone told him something that immediately changed the situation. He said that his mother was one of the women living in that house, not just someone who lived there, someone who had a past. He explained that she was a former wife of Warren Jeffs. At the time, that name didn't mean much to the neighbor. But the way it was said made it clear that it mattered, that it wasn't just a random detail. There was something serious behind it. The tone of the conversation shifted. The man on the phone wasn't just making small talk. He was asking for help. He told the neighbor that people connected to Warren Jeffs were coming for his mother, that she was in danger, that she needed to know. He asked the neighbor to pass along a message. Just a simple warning. The kind of thing that sounds small when you say it out loud, but carries a weight that's hard to ignore when you're the one being asked to do it. The neighbor didn't want to get involved. You can understand why. It didn't sound like a normal situation. It sounded like something complicated, something risky. He didn't know these people. He didn't know the man calling him. And now suddenly he was being pulled into something that felt bigger than he was prepared to handle. But at the same time, it wasn't something he could just ignore completely. So he said he would try. Not a firm promise, not a commitment. Just enough to end the conversation. After that, things became uncertain. From what I heard, the neighbor made some kind of attempt to reach out. Maybe he tried to approach the house. Maybe he looked for a moment when he could pass along the message without drawing attention to himself. But it wasn't easy. The people inside didn't interact much with the outside world, and he didn't want to expose himself or make it obvious that he was involved. Days passed, then weeks. At some point, he decided to call the number back. Maybe he wanted to confirm what was going on. Maybe he felt uneasy about the whole situation and wanted closure. Or maybe he just wanted to know if it had been taken care of. But when someone answered, it wasn't the same person. It was someone else. And what they told him didn't make things clearer. It made them worse. The person who had called him, the one who asked for help, was dead. They said he had taken his own life. There was no explanation beyond that. No details, no context. Just that simple, heavy statement that left more questions than answers. After that, the neighbor went next door. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was concern. Maybe it was just the feeling that something wasn't right and needed to be checked. But when he got there, the house was empty, completely abandoned. No people, no movement, nothing. Whatever had been happening there, whatever those girls were part of, it had ended suddenly and without explanation. The house, which had once been filled with quiet, controlled life, was now just another empty building. And that was it. No follow-up, no clear answers. Just a story that didn't quite resolve itself. Looking back, it's one of those things that stays with you, not because you fully understand it, but because you don't. Because of how many pieces don't quite fit together. The girls, the house, the phone call, the warning, and then the silence that followed. It all feels connected, but in a way that's hard to trace. And maybe that's what makes it unsettling. Not knowing what really happened. Or how close it might have been to something much worse. It's one of those stories that feels simple when you first hear it. Almost familiar. Like something that could easily blend in with other stories people tell. But the more you sit with it, the more unsettling it becomes. Not because it's complicated or hard to understand, but because of how normal everything feels right up until the moment it doesn't. The kind of situation that doesn't stand out as dangerous until it's already too late. This story wasn't told to me directly by the person it happened to. It came through my cousin, about a girl she knew, not very closely, just the kind of connection where you hear things secondhand. That distance made it feel different. It didn't sound exaggerated or dramatic. It was told in a quiet, almost matter-of-fact way, like something that had simply happened and then been passed along without much embellishment. At the time, the girl was staying alone in her house for a few days while her parents were out of town. For most people, especially when you're young, that kind of situation doesn't feel dangerous. It feels like a small taste of independence, a break from being watched, a chance to do things on your own schedule, to relax without anyone else around. It's the kind of freedom that feels exciting, not risky. Nothing about it stood out as unusual. Around that same time, she had started talking to a guy on Tinder. It wasn't anything serious at first, just casual conversation. The kind that happens every day between people who meet online. From everything I heard, there were no obvious warning signs. He didn't seem strange or aggressive. He came across as normal, easy to talk to. Someone who didn't raise any concerns. That's what makes situations like this harder to recognize. If someone seems dangerous right away, most people would walk away. But when everything feels normal, when nothing stands out, it's easy to lower your guard without even realizing it. After talking for a while, they decided to meet. It was planned in a simple, casual way. A normal date, somewhere public, somewhere that didn't feel risky. There wasn't anything unusual about it. It was just something people do all the time, meeting someone new and seeing if there's any connection. At some point during their conversations, she mentioned that her parents were out of town and that she was staying alone in the house. It probably didn't feel important. Just a small detail. The kind of thing people say without thinking twice about it. The date itself went fine. That's one of the parts that makes the story more unsettling when you think about it later. There was no moment where things felt off, no clear sign that something wasn't right. They talked, spent time together, and everything seemed normal. Eventually, later that night, he drove her home. They said their goodbyes like any other date would end. He left. She went inside. Everything felt ordinary. She locked the door, settled into the house, and started to relax. The night had gone as expected, nothing out of place, nothing that would have made her feel uneasy. At some point, she ended up sitting on the couch. The house was quiet in that deep, noticeable way it gets when you're the only person there. Every small sound feels sharper. The silence isn't empty. It's filled with little noises that you don't usually notice when other people are around. The faint creaks, the soft movements of a house settling. That's when she heard something. A noise coming from the basement. At first, it was easy to ignore. It didn't sound loud or dramatic. Just something small. Something that could easily be explained away. Houses make noise all the time. Pipes shift, wood expands. Things move in ways that don't mean anything. Most people would have brushed it off. Something about it didn't feel right. Maybe it was the timing. Maybe it was the quiet. Or maybe it was just instinct, that subtle feeling that something is wrong even when you can't explain why. Instead of going to check it herself, she made a decision that seemed small, but ended up making all the difference. She picked up the home phone and called the police. Looking back, that detail stands out more than anything else. Most people would reach for their cell phone without thinking. It's always nearby, always the first choice. But for some reason, she used the house phone instead. When she spoke to the dispatcher, she explained what she had heard, that she was alone, that there was a noise in the basement, and that something didn't feel right. The person on the other end listened. But their response didn't sound urgent. They told her it was probably nothing, that houses make sounds, that it might just be something normal. But even as they downplayed it, they gave her instructions. They told her to leave the house and wait outside. They said they would send someone, but it might take some time. From her point of view, it must have felt confusing. Being told it wasn't serious, but also being told to leave the house. It didn't fully make sense, but she didn't question it. She followed what they said. She stepped outside into the night and waited. Standing there, alone in the quiet, it probably started to feel like she had overreacted. That maybe it really was nothing. That she had let her imagination get the better of her. But within a few minutes, a police car arrived. Much faster than she had expected. That's when everything changed. The officers told her what had actually happened. While she was on the phone with the dispatcher, they hadn't just been listening to her. They had heard something else. Another line in the house had been picked up. Someone else had been on the call. Silent, listening. That's why they had acted the way they did. That's why they didn't sound alarmed. They didn't want whoever was inside the house to realize they had been discovered. They needed to keep things calm, to keep him from running, long enough for them to get there. The moment she heard that, everything shifted. There hadn't been a harmless noise. There had been someone inside the house, someone who wasn't supposed to be there. The officers went in carefully. They moved through the house, checking each room, heading toward the basement where the sound had come from. It didn't take long for them to find him. He was still there, waiting. And when they saw who it was, it made the situation even more disturbing. It was the same man she had just been on a date with. The same person who had seemed completely normal only hours earlier. The one who had smiled, talked, and acted like anyone else. He had come back. He had found a way inside. And he had stayed there, hidden in the basement. He wasn't empty-handed. He had carving knives with him. That detail changes everything. It removes any doubt about why he was there. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't harmless. There was intention behind it, something planned, something that could have turned into something much worse. And that's the part that stays with you. Because if she had gone downstairs to check the noise herself, if she had ignored it and stayed on the couch, if she had hesitated or decided not to call, the outcome could have been completely different. In the end, it came down to something small. Using the house phone. That single choice allowed the dispatcher to hear what she couldn't. It allowed them to realize she wasn't alone. And it gave them just enough time to handle the situation without alerting him. It's the kind of story that doesn't rely on anything dramatic to feel frightening. There are no complicated twists, no long chain of events. Just a normal night, a simple date, a small detail mentioned in conversation, and a quiet noise in the basement that could have easily been ignored. Sometimes it's not the big decisions that change everything. It's the small ones. It's one of those stories that doesn't feel dramatic at first. At least not in the way people usually expect when they hear something tragic. There's no long build-up, no chain of bad choices that slowly lead to the outcome, nothing that gives you time to see it coming. It's simple, direct, and over in seconds, and that's exactly what makes it so unsettling, because it shows how quickly everything can change, even for someone who spent an entire lifetime doing everything right. My grandfather had been a semi-truck driver for most of his life. It wasn't just a job to him. It was something he had built his identity around. He worked delivering products for Pepsi, driving the same types of routes day after day, year after year. He started when he was around 21 years old, and he stayed with it all the way into his 60s. By the time this happened, he was 64, just 1 year away from retirement. That detail matters more than anything else, because after more than 40 years on the road, he had never been in a single accident. Not one. Not while working, not in his personal life, not even a minor scrape or close call that turned into something official. He was the kind of driver people trusted without hesitation. Careful, disciplined, always aware of his surroundings. The type of person who didn't take risks, who understood the responsibility that came with being behind the wheel of something that large. When you imagine someone who has spent decades driving a semi-truck without a single accident, you picture someone who knows exactly what they're doing. Someone who has seen everything the road can throw at them and handled it without making a mistake. That's what makes what happened feel so unfair. It was just another normal day. There was nothing unusual about it. No bad weather, no dangerous conditions, no warning signs that anything was about to go wrong. He was driving his usual route. The same kind of drive he had done thousands of times before. The road wasn't new to him. It was familiar, predictable, almost routine. The kind of day that blends into every other day. And then, in a single moment, everything changed. A man pulled out of his driveway. Not slowly, not cautiously, but directly into the road, straight into the path of my grandfather's truck. There was no hesitation, no pause to check if it was clear. Just a sudden movement into a space that was already occupied. There was no warning, no time to prepare, no space to react the way you would want to. My grandfather did everything he could. He hit the brakes as hard as possible, putting all his strength into it. At the same time, he leaned on the horn, holding it down, trying to alert the driver, trying to give him any chance at all to realize what was happening. From what I was told, this didn't happen in a split second. It lasted a few seconds, long enough for him to try, long enough for him to fight against what was coming, but not long enough to stop it, because a semi-truck doesn't stop instantly. That's something people don't always understand unless they've been around them. The size, the weight, the momentum. Even when you react immediately, even when you do everything exactly right, there are limits. Physics doesn't change just because you need it to. The truck couldn't stop in time. It hit the car, and the impact killed the man. Just like that. After more than 40 years of doing everything right, my grandfather found himself in a moment that couldn't be undone. It didn't matter how careful he had been before. It didn't matter how much experience he had. None of it could change what had already happened. From what I was told, he called the police immediately. He wasn't calm. He wasn't composed. He was screaming, crying, completely overwhelmed. The kind of reaction that comes from shock hitting all at once. This wasn't just an accident to him. It wasn't just another incident on the road. It was something that broke through everything he thought he understood about control. Later, he called my mom and her siblings. He was still crying when he spoke to them, his voice shaking, struggling to explain something that didn't feel real even as he said it out loud. It wasn't something he could process quickly. It wasn't something he could just accept and move on from. It stayed with him. For months after that, he wasn't the same. Something had shifted in him. The confidence he had built over decades was gone. In its place was something heavier. Guilt, even though it wasn't his fault. Fear, even though he had done everything he could. The kind of weight that doesn't go away just because someone tells you that you weren't responsible. Moments like that don't fade easily. They replay over and over again. The sound of the brakes, the horn, the image of the car pulling out, the feeling of knowing you can't stop in time, even when you know logically that there was nothing more you could have done. It doesn't change how it feels. And then, just when it seemed like things couldn't get any harder, they did. The family of the man who died decided to sue him, even after everything. Even after it had already been determined at the scene that the other driver was at fault. My grandfather had to hire a lawyer. He had to go through the process, sit through conversations, answer questions, and relive the moment again and again. Every detail brought back, every second examined. It wasn't just about what had happened anymore. It became something official, something drawn out. The stress of it added to everything he was already carrying. But as the case went on, the truth became clearer. Details started to come out that changed how everything was seen. The man who had pulled out into the road had been taking a prescription medication. Not just any medication, but one that specifically came with a warning. He had been told not to drive while taking it. He ignored that warning. And that decision led directly to what happened. Once that information came out, the case fell apart almost immediately. There was no argument left to support the claim against my grandfather. The facts were clear, and the responsibility was no longer something that could be shifted. The lawsuit was dropped, just like that. And after that, my grandfather never heard from the family again. Legally, everything was resolved. But that didn't fix anything. It didn't undo the accident. It didn't erase the memory. It didn't give him back the sense of control he had spent his entire life building. When my mom told me this story, it stayed with me in a way I didn't expect. Not because it was complicated, but because of how simple it was, how easily it could happen. A normal day, a familiar road, a single decision made by someone else, and suddenly, a lifetime of doing everything right isn't enough to stop what's coming. Even now, when I think about it, it still feels unsettling. Because it's not just about the accident itself. It's about how fragile control really is, how quickly things can change, and how sometimes, even when it isn't your fault, you're still the one who has to carry it with you for the rest of your life. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survive things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.